Welcome to the Awakening Philosophy podcast read along. My name is Jed, and we have been discussing what exactly philosophy is, how philosophy affects us, how we can use philosophy in our own lives, and how exactly we should go on the philosophical quest. How specifically do we awaken philosophy in our lives? To understand this and experience this and apply this, we've been reading Plato's Parmenides, famously called the greatest book never read, because in the Parmenides, Parmenides, who is Socrates' teacher, basically the lineage is, we know about Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher. He started the first universities in the West with the academy. They had a different way of understanding education, of course, learning as remembering. Education wasn't cramming things into students' heads, facts and things, making sure you can remember them. It was using understanding of something in particular called the logos to awaken the higher knowing that you have within your own soul through something that we call ousia, the eye of the soul, or the eye of the mind. And you are remembering, learning as remembering. So, by modern terminology, we might call it a academic and spiritual exercise. Intellect, awakening the highest aspects of our own intellect, which we could call spiritual, because it has a non-physical existence. It exists prior to the physical world, so it gets given the name metaphysics. Before physics is what the word means. It is something we can experience for ourselves in a non-physical way with this sense of the mind called ousia. So in that sense, we could call it spiritual because we experience the spirit. And the fact that it's knowable directly, we give it the name intelligible. So a bunch of cool words that philosophy has. And as people who are open to or curious about or endeavoring to take on the philosophical quest ourselves, that's part of our job. That's how we relate to philosophy. We develop key ideas, key terms, which involves key ideas that we're discovering, that we're investigating, like beauty and justice, but also words themselves, terminology, like ousia, like intelligible. What does intelligible mean? It's not just understandable, but knowable. In philosophy, there is the word for objects that are knowable, things that can be experienced directly with the highest parts of our own mind. That word in the Greek is ideia. E-I-D-O-S, eideos, is the root word in the Greek, often mistranslated as simply idea in English because it sounds so similar. But the key difference between the two is the key difference between where we are at in our current culture and humanity, what most people probably are used to thinking, and where Socrates, in the book we're reading called the Parmenides, which is a book in which Socrates meets a teacher named Parmenides, Socrates is at that same junction as well. What's the difference? Ideia in the Greek, meaning to behold, that which is intelligible, metaphysical, spiritual, knowable through Usia, these key ideas, compared to what would be the modern idea of what an idea is. Concept. What's a concept? Well, it's something you infer from your sense observations. You notice a beautiful thing over there, a beautiful thing over there, a beautiful painting, a beautiful person, and from these physical expressions, you infer that there must be an idea of beauty as a concept. So people will say things like, oh, that's just a concept. That's all it is. It doesn't have any, it's just a thought, really. Hey, we could have, beauty doesn't have any real existence. It's just an artifact of language, really. It's just something that we use in our language. But something we made up. Hey, we could have quite easily called it a different word. Or we only think 1 and 1 equals 2 because that's just what we've decided with our language. We could have said something else. It could be 3. There's no actual 2-ness or there's no actual beauty. It's just a concept. This is the crossroads that we're at. In our last talks, we talked about how, and you can watch the videos. I think the videos stay on Twitch for a while, and most of the ones that in which we read Parmenides, I'll be uploading to YouTube too. You can check those out on the YouTube channel. We talked about how the divergence from this way of thinking, which we can call perennial philosophy, which is a word to say the parent philosophy, philosophy as one, diverged in history after Plato to philosophy as many. The way we think of philosophy nowadays. That is, many different opinions, many different concepts. So if you go to a school or college in which you learn philosophy, that's more than likely what you're going to be learning. They will cram all these concepts into your head, these opinions. Kant's opinion, Hegel's opinion, Nietzsche's opinion. These sorts of figures, these European thinkers that think of philosophy in that kind of way, as a concept. It's true to you if you happen to think it, but everyone has their own personal philosophy. And if you want to become a philosopher, all you got to do is be really, really smart and really good at reading books and remembering big long words so you can talk about Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche and all these sorts of people and sound really, really smart to make your personal philosophy sound like it's legitimate because other smart people who have died in the past thought a similar way. Or if you're clever, you can make it sound like they thought in a similar way to you. Of course, most people don't have the time or don't have the interest in reading these old books from these old dead European thinkers. And most people are not used to using these really long, complicated words. So it's kind of out of the reach of most people. Which is a problem because philosophy is everyone's quest. It's our birthright. We're born into this world that participates of an intelligent, intelligible structure and pattern. There's a communication from the higher dimensions of reality, a communication from the intelligence which creates and sustains the world to us, to help us in our quest. What does that mean? That means we have meaning. What do we mean by meaning? Well, we have a reason for being here. We have a goal. We have a purpose. And if we're making the claim, by the way, these are all claims, These are not things to be believed, but to be held and carried as questions as you go through this journey yourself and verify them for yourself through your own understanding and knowing. You understand how and why it must be so, and you verify for yourself through your own direct experience. Understanding and knowing. These are the two key elements in philosophy. They have their own Greek words, dianoia and nous. Why is that special? Well, because we think of understanding in a lot of different ways. We often think of beliefs as understanding. Scientific beliefs we call understanding sometimes. And when we talk about knowing, that's another English word that's used in a lot of different ways. So when we're talking about understanding the metaphysical, also understanding our dimension, but recognizing that our dimension is a byproduct or shadow or copy through a different level of the higher realm. So we're specifically understanding the higher realms, the metaphysical. What's the name for that pattern? The logos. Applying our understanding and knowing to the logos, to the meaningful, to the mind, to reality, to the self. That's the kind of understanding we're interested in as philosophers, because that can awaken a philosophy in our lives, that can awaken our quest, our destiny. Oh, let the word destiny slip. So that's why that kind of understanding pertaining to those particular things has a special name, dianoia and nous. In English, understanding and knowledge, but we have to keep in mind both, because we don't mean regular idea of understanding. We don't mean a regular idea of knowledge. Like, oh, I know that that it's going to rain tomorrow. No, that's not knowledge. We're particularly talking about the metaphysical. That which can be apprehended, that exists in the highest part of our minds that we're here to remember. Understanding and knowing, dianoia and nous. Those are our tools. So if there is such a journey in that sort of a way to that which is meaningful, our purpose, and it applies to all people who have awakened their intellect, who have evolved to the level as a species, as a being that can talk, that can reason, that can use language. If that purpose applies to all people, no matter where you are, no matter what planet, what galaxy, what point in time, then there's a special name in philosophy for that kind of purpose, that is destiny. So we are here as philosophers, as humans, to awaken our destiny, and philosophy is our human birthright because it's the method through which we can do that. That's how we relate back to philosophy, through how we relate back to our purpose, our highest goals, is through philosophy. How do we do that? Through the logos. Logos is the key term in philosophy. It's what makes all the difference. Logos is that thing which is apprehendable through understanding and knowing. Logos is talking. Logos is language. Logos is dialogue. Logos is that through which the higher levels of reality can communicate to us, and it's the way in which we can return back. We talked about that last time. There's a way of viewing reality in which there is a connection between the divine and us, and it's through the logos. We also recently talked about, well, if the nature of that which has the logos, what is the logos? Understandable and knowable, intellectual and intelligible, big fancy words that just mean that those two things. Intellectual, you can understand them. It has mind. Intelligible is you can grasp them with your mind. You can know them directly through a higher experience in the zone, or in an enlightenment experience, in meditation. All of a sudden, lots of different ways of getting there. But we use the logos to get there often, go deeper, and integrate it into our being. So if there is such a thing as the logos and a source of the logos, then we talked about what must be the nature of that thing. And that's where we were in the text. The text that we're reading is Plato's Parmenides. Plato writing a story about Parmenides, who was the teacher of Socrates. So in the lineage we have Xenophanes as the earliest philosopher that we know about. All we know from him is pretty much the passage, "It is the whole that sees and hears." And a lot of people wonder, what does he mean? Does he mean the whole of God? Does he mean the all? That's interesting because Parmenides is writing poems making the argument that all is one. What does he mean by all? Is it the same thing his teacher Xenophanes meant when he said it's the whole that's seeing and hearing right now? What is that? Is that the thing that's one? So Xenophanes, it is the whole that's seeing and hearing right now. Parmenides is poems. All is one. What does he mean by is? What does he mean by all? And what kind of one? That's Parmenides. He has a student, Zeno, but also he is the student of Socrates. Socrates is our main character in the Platonic texts. Socrates has a student named Plato. Socrates didn't write anything down, but his student Plato did. Plato started the academy that we talked about. The universities that understood that understanding was just one part of your mind. It's one thing you can do, but it's not all the things that we can do. It's not even the highest thing we can do. Well, that's debatable. Understanding is there, but it's a springboard or a ladder through which we can experience the higher functions or cognitive functions of our mind. Knowing. So that was Plato, who started the academy. To Xenophanes, to Parmenides, to Socrates, to Plato. Those are our key figures. After Plato, we have Aristotle, who kind of missed the mark, left metaphysics, left the intelligible, left the beholding, and that devolved into where we are today, where there is no metaphysics in modern philosophy, really. It's just concepts. But interestingly, well, that's our problem. If you grow up in modern culture, you probably don't hear a lot of people talking about metaphysics. You probably don't run into a lot of people saying, what's the beautiful? Not a beautiful thing. I mean, you hear people talking about a beautiful car or a beautiful woman, perhaps, but who talks about what is beauty itself? Self by self, just on its own. The key word in that kind of conversation is the word the. What is the beautiful? Not a beautiful thing. It's not a common kind of conversation you have at the pub. So that's where we are, most of us. Brought up in a culture which doesn't talk about, doesn't really acknowledge too much the existence of objects, beings, intelligent life, that it predates the physical universe, predates time and space. Therefore, we call it metaphysical. And if it's outside of time, then it's immortal. If it's outside of space, if it's outside of space, it's immortal. If it's outside of time, it's eternal. So it's always there for us to know as soon as we are open to it. Doesn't go anywhere. doesn't decay, doesn't get old, doesn't die. So if we're interested in those things, if we want to know not just what's your philosophy or what's your opinion, but what's the philosophy, not just what's your truth. Hey, I've got a lot of crazy relatives with a lot of crazy, stupid opinions. I don't care about what their truth is or what their philosophy is. Why would I? How can I use that? How can I benefit from that? If it's just untrue, an untrue opinion, I'm not interested in their opinion. I'm not interested in a philosophy, a truth, their truth. I'm interested in the. Keyword the. We're putting the in front of these key ideas. And that's where our lead character in the book that we're reading, Socrates, in the book Parmenides, is at. He is saying to Socrates, Socrates is saying to Parmenides, hey, look, we're talking about one and many, just as we are. So we're doing the same thing. We talked about one philosophy and many philosophies, and we're interested in the one philosophy. Socrates is saying the same thing. Hey, I'm not interested in a one and a many, and what they are in themselves, on their own. The Greek is self by self. So separate them apart, and so we can look at them individually, but also blend them together to see how they fit with each other. And also want to know if these ideas affect me in some way. But the ideas I'm interested in is not a beautiful, but the beautiful. Not one and many in the physical, in the examples. And he said, look, it's not wonderful to think about me being one and many, because of course I have many hands. I have many parts to my body. I have a front and a back and up and a left and a right. These are many things. That's not interesting, but I'm also one person. There are 7 of us here, so there's many ones here. That's not interesting. I'm not interested in that. Modern, physical, what we would call empirical, which is a fancy word that means what you can see with your senses. Like you go to university to study science, it's empirical science. I'm not interested in that. That's obvious that one and many both exist and they have a relationship. I'm interested in the one. The many. What does the word the do? It takes the adjective and makes it a noun. It takes a descriptive and makes it a substantive. Not many to describe things, but many itself. What is that? That's our question, that's Socrates' question, and that's why it's so wonderful that we can read this text. And that's part of the journey. As a philosopher, there are certain texts that communicate the Logos to us. So what do we have to do in return? We have to match it. We have to, well, if we're interested in these sorts of things, meaning, purpose, destiny, truth, and we have to meet it with ourselves. We have to offer up our mind to the self of the Logos. By reading the book, by doing the same things, just as he is separating these key ideas, one and many, beauty, well, likeness and unlikeness. Taking apart beauty on its own, justice on its own, understanding them, and then understanding how they relate to each other. We are matching them. We are raising ourselves to the level of the high-level adventurers. We want to ourselves level up. Level up sound effect. So we are doing a similar thing in the text. We're looking at the book, which communicates the Logos to us from these wise men who happen to have lived over 2,000 years ago, but their words are as true today as they are back then. We are interested in this too. We are stuck at the level of concepts. We are curious about what truth is, what beauty is, what the one is. So we have to separate the key ideas from the text, What do these key words mean? What does he mean when he says idea? We have to separate them apart and we have to blend them together. How is he using it in this sentence? How is he using it to get to his goal? What's his purpose? So we are matching them. That's the philosophical quest. That's the importance of reading this book together, sharing our understanding, developing questions as we go, separating the key ideas out, looking for patterns. When you see some significant patterns, you can add that to your skill set. So next time you see a pair, like likeness and unlikeness, one in many, you might come across a new pair, like we came across the word rest and motion, and we have that selfer pair seeing. We recognize there are some key ideas or selfer terms. Selfer because the word self in the Greek has the honorific, which means it can refer to the beings themselves. So we call them selfer terms. Is motion and rest a selfer pair? Because it's a pair that seems opposites, and they also seem like principles that are fundamental and principles that we participate in our everyday life. I mean, everything I've ever seen is either at rest or in motion. So this is our seeing. We're leveling up our skill set as we go by recognizing certain patterns. So we're like, we're leveling up as human beings towards the ultimate quest of knowing the nature of reality, the nature of our purpose, the nature of our destiny, how to get there, and what, after all, is the self. And that's where we're at in the text. So we're going to go back to the text in a minute. And when Socrates was puzzled, we saw Parmenides was explaining, well, if the ideas, the beings, are not concepts, what are they? And he brought in the master-slave analogy. He said, look, when we talk about lords and slaves in our everyday world, the Lord isn't the Lord over the selfhood of the slave. He doesn't care about this destiny for the slave. He doesn't care about awakening him to philosophy, awakening him to the logos, which is the ladder he can use to reach his knowing of his true nature and purpose. That's not the kind of Lord we have in our everyday world, right? When you go to work, do you think the boss sits down and has a conversation to you about how are you going with your quest to know the nature of reality and the self? Let's spend the whole day at work, getting further along, benefiting you in that way. I almost never have that conversation with a boss I've worked with in this world. But in the world of being, in the higher realm, the realm of the divine, instead of a lord and slave, they have a master and... what's the word that they use? Let me get the right word. Oh, and this is important. To stay as true to the text as possible is part of that activity of raising our mind to the accuracy of the text and the mind of the author. So it's a kind of yoga, it's a kind of discipline in itself. Why is that? Well, because normally when we read or view anything, we have a tendency to project what we're used to seeing or expect to see. This activity of projecting what's not there or leaving out, not seeing what is there, that's called interpretation. The more we can remove ourselves from interpretation to see what is in the text, that's the training, that's the activity, that's the movement of the logos. And it's a yoga. Yoga is a word that means to join, and so it's Yoga is from the word yoke, which means to join. I guess the middle of the egg is the yolk, which is all joined together. But yoga means a method through which you can join with the higher. So if there is a higher, which that's what we're talking about, and we want to join with it, behold it, know it, nous, through usia, then an English word that means that kind of activity is yoga. So we could say this is a yoga. It's an intellectual yoga, a yoga of understanding. So as we want to take part in that, we want to remove the things that get in the way from seeing what is. And that applies to both the text, but also the text as an analogy or a metaphor or an exercise for reality. You could say this, another way of talking about the spiritual exercise is to see what is. What exists? What is? Another word for is exists. What's real? What's reality? What's the truth? To see what is without delusion is the spiritual quest. It's personal development. It applies to anything. The better you get at, fixing a bicycle. That's kind of boring. How about, let's say football. The more you level up in football, the more you get better and improve in football, the more you can see what is actually going on. You might start off kind of scared because people are bumping into each other or yelling at each other. Oh, they're all fighting and they all hate each other. But the more you understand and you grow, the more you can take away those projections and see what's actually happening, see what is. You have words like, that's a forward, that's a defender, that's a tackle. Use these words and use your pattern recognition. That's an offside. Well, that's a penalty kick. I can recognize these patterns to see what's there. So that's the physical expression. But we want to see the ultimate. We want to raise that analogy to the highest principle, perhaps even the principle or the archetype from which this principle is able to express itself in football. The key word, for taking an example and elevating it to the highest principle in an analogy or a metaphor, fun word, anagogic. You are looking at the metaphor anagogically. The word anagogic comes from two words, ana and gogic. Actually, I'm going to have to look into that. It applies to an analogy, which has the same starting part of the word, ana, and logos. So having a higher logos is something that you can say is an analogy. This example has a higher logos, higher expression through the logos, a higher reality, a higher way of understanding, a higher way of experiencing. It's the logos, reality, understanding, experiencing. By the way, as we go, we're also building a better and bigger definition of the word logos, because logos is one of those key words that we're seeking to understand and know for ourselves. It's a big one. Ana logos, having a higher level to the logos. And moving to that higher level is anagogic. Maybe higher moving. Anyway, so applying that football example anagogically is the spiritual quest. To see what is, not just on a football field, but in reality, in mind, in consciousness, in truth. So that's what we're hoping to do in the text also as an analogy to reality. And if the text itself participates in the logos to a high level, like reality does, then it's a very close analogy. It's not much of a jump to read Parmenides, Plato's Parmenides, as it is there. It's not much of a jump to go from that to see reality itself as it is there. That's why we do it. So, as an example of that, I am pulling out the key word that I was referring to from the text as it was. Oh yes, the master and the servant. That's right. The Lord and the servant is the lower of the analogy, and applied anagogically. In the world of being, we have the master and the... Where's the word? Let's pull up the text so we can both look at it. Here we go. Steward. This is where we left off here. Right, so we were on the analogy of... Let's bring up the text. The analogy that Parmenides is using as a way of answering Socrates' question. If ideas are not just concepts, they have their own existence. Remember, he walked him through the idea that, well, even if they are concepts that you think in your mind, do you think they're concepts of something or of nothing? Of being or non-being? And he also talked about, by the way, if you can think about them, wouldn't these concepts that have being be themselves of the nature of thought for them to be thinkable, right? Like if you, if you can eat something, if you can eat a donut, it has to be of the nature of that which is edible itself. Kind of like that. So these are thinkable. So participating of, what's the word? Ousia. Their nature is ousia, a kind of being that's of mind, that is eternal, that is open to be experienced. If they are concepts, they have to be concepts of being. And if they're thinkable, they have to be intelligent in some way. It can't be a dead, dumb thing. And so, Parmenides is using an analogy to explain the possible ways of answering Socrates' question. He didn't just say, oh, this is what they are. By the way, this is what they are. No, that's not how he does it. Let's pull up our notes. He answered in a specific kind of way, didn't he? He answered in 4 ways. He said, there's one way of thinking about the beings. Just themselves, on their own. What they are, themselves. Beings existing as selves only. And this was a great sentence because we have 3 key Greek words that we're learning ourselves and we're introducing into our own language. So we can, why? Well, if we have the word, we can recognize it. We can see it. So we're developing a language of keywords that don't exist in the English language yet, but we're adding it in that's not a camera I normally use. We're adding it in so that we can see through it, so we can act through it, see through it, function with it. And we talked about we talked about the we talked about this being the one philosophy in the Greek tradition, and that has its lineage from Xenophanes to Parmenides to Socrates to Plato to end. And what happened after Plato is something that we call modern. Well, we don't call it modern. We call it Stoic philosophy. We take the metaphysics out. It's called Stoicism. Or we could say it's empiricism, thinking that the world is only that which you can see with your senses. What's curious about that is that's the tradition from the Romans. So it's kind of a Greeks versus Romans thing happening. That sounds like an awesome video game. Age of Empires sort of thing. But what's significant about the Roman, I'm just adjusting something here, the Roman language, the Latin, is that it does not have the word the. So they can't have a discussion that Socrates is having. So if Socrates comes in with our modern problem, that the Romans, the Latins, the Europeans, we currently have, that is, we only think of ideas as concepts. What do we do about it? What can we do about it? Well, Socrates is able to have this kind of conversation. Specifically, let's get, I should highlight this actually. Let's get the exact way he asked the question here. So we're after this thing here. The ousia of each idea. Ousia, the intelligent, recursive, recurring upon itself, folding upon itself, nature of being. Of each idea subsisting self by self. That's what we're after. But the way that Socrates asked this question was, he talked about wood. Here we go. Oh, where is it? I am going to highlight it so I can... here we go. Wood insta, here we go. I'm not interested, on the one hand, okay, so if someone should demonstrate that I am one in many, what would be wondrous about this? Who cares? Because I have parts. There's the right side of me, there's other from the left parts. So the idea of other, different. The front parts are different from the back parts, are other from the back parts. Upper from the lower, for I partake of manyness, or multitude. But on the other hand, if he brings to light that I am one, you could say, well, there's 7 of us, and I am one man, so I participate of the one. And you could do the same thing of stones and wood and other such particulars, that they are both many in one. But he does not show that the one is many, or the many is one. You can show that I am one in many, but the one. If he does that about stones and wood and other such particulars, that they are both many and one, we would say that self exhibits to our view such things as are many in one, but he does not show that the one is many, or the many one. Nor does he speak of anything wonderful. But he's just speaking of that which we would agree is affirmed by all. he could separate the ideas apart from themselves, the ones we've been speaking of, like likeness and unlikeness, many and one, the one, rest and motion, blend them together and separate them apart, self in themselves, and I would indeed be in wondrous admiration. We should strenuously labor in the investigation of this. You could solve that puzzle about the beings, about the ousia of self woven into these ideal selves. He recognized that these beings, these ideals, have a ousia kind of existence, not which we see with the faculty of sight. What's that? Stoicism, empiricism, materialism, physicalism, the way we think about the world today. Socrates is saying, hey, you know these people in 2024? Everyone thinks that way. That's not easy. That's not hard to see. But we know as Greeks that there's also another way. That would be wondrous to talk about. I would be in admiration of you if you could talk in that way. Not the way these dopes in 2024 think of the world. See, do you know all the problems they're having in their world? Says Socrates. These guys are nuts. They're not elevating themselves to the one, the many, the truth, the justice. So they're living in a crazy world. What happens? How do they relate to each other? Not being able to access this higher? Capitalism, slavery, fascism, war, wealth inequality, destruction of the environment. That's what they're doing to each other. Those guys are nuts, says Socrates 2,500 years ago. All they can talk about is stones and wood. I want to instead look at this. I want to be able to solve this puzzle about the ousia, the beings, the truth, the ideal selves, the keyword the keyword the keyword the one, the many. The ideas, the ousia selves, the beings which we call the ideas, which we can grasp. What's the word? Intelligible. How? Through the activity of the logos. Socrates, 2,500 years ago, is reaching out to us and saying, hey, 2024, you guys are in a mess. Why? You're in a Latin tradition that doesn't have the word the. What does that mean? Well, you can't talk about the truth, only a truth. Well, then how do you know what's right and wrong? You don't. You fight over it. You oppress people. You tyrannize people in whatever way you can, politically or militarily or economically, through the justice system, all sorts of religious systems, through all these systems of oppression to push your a truth. You're stuck because you left Plato and you went into a language which didn't have the word the. You couldn't talk about the ideas which we grasp by the activity of the logos. So he's saying, hey, wake up, guys. Awaken philosophy. Awaken the logos. So how do we get out of the problem? Well, first of all, thankfully we have English and we have the word the. There are a lot of languages that don't. Russian doesn't have the word the. Bosnian, I think, doesn't. Maybe Spanish. So they're going to be limited from this kind of question. They might be stuck too. But we have English, and English is something that anyone can use. So we're okay there. There's one more word we need to add. How do we grasp the ousia of the ideas? The activity of the logos. We need to add the idea of logos. That's the activity through which we can answer this question. Wow. Was that worth it? Wow. Owen Wilson saying wow. So, where were we? So we need the word logos in our language as we do the word the, which is the activity through which we can grasp these ideas and move from concepts, which are many and not one. Look at how Socrates is asking this question. We've talked about the ideas such as likeness and unlikeness, rest and motion. He wants to know the one and the many. Of all of the ideas, think about the ideas, the self pairs we have so far. Likeness and unlikeness, motion and rest, and the other self terms like beauty and justice. Where would one and many rank? In your own thinking, where would you put one and many if you were to hierarchically rank these self ideas? Anyway, Socrates picks out the one and the many. So we want to know the truth, the way of relating to each other well, the way of becoming like each other well, the way of living in motion with each other well in the world, acting in the world, being like each other, addressing the things that are unlikeness in a way that is good and beautiful. These are the things that are needed in 2024, in your life, in my life, in our whole species. And if we don't, we're going to be stuck where Socrates is stuck. We are Socrates. But we have the word the, which is good. We have that in English too. We also have to introduce the key idea of ousia, idea, and logos. Specifically logos. Because you could say if logos is a kind of language which applies to this kind of learning, this kind of development, then part of the logos would be ousia. I asked about the hierarchy here. Where would you put ousia and idea with logos? Could you say ousia is a logos, a language, a idea? So we need the logos to go from concepts to ideas. Now that's the question that Socrates puts forward, and Parmenides answered in 3 and 4 different kinds of ways. Well, first of all, to reiterate, he asked him, by the way, do you think there's an idea of hair and clay and dust that seem without honor and worthless? Socrates says, sometimes I feel like I'm going to fall into an abyss of nonsense and utterly perish when I ask about those things. Which in one way, of course, you would say that there must be an idea of those because there are things that participate of. There's hair things. I have hair and you have hair. And there's dust and there's dirt and there's clay and there's mud. But on the other hand, it seems the height of absurdity to think of them so honorifically. Parmenides says, that's because you're young, dude. He's young, but we haven't asked these questions in our society, so we're a bit younger than Socrates. And philosophy has not received you into her embraces. So you're dishonoring any of the selves if you will not dishonor any of the selves when you are received by her. But the problem, you take heed to the opinions of human beings. What do we say we do in our society? We talk about a truth, a philosophy. What's another way of saying that? Opinions. You go to study philosophy at school, what do you learn? Opinions. Hey, that's the cause of the problem you've got, buddy. Opinions of the divine, the logos? No, human beings. That's where we're at. We need to ourselves separate ourselves from the regular opinions of human beings that we call empiricism, relativism. It's all relative to your truth or my truth or our perspectives. Empiricism, it's all physical things. Materialism, same idea there. Stoicism, a way of looking at Plato, taking out the beings, taking out the metaphysics. This is the Latin way of thinking that causes us in the mess we're at. Causes us to be in the mess we're in now. But thankfully we can read this book. They had a conversation about in what way do we participate in the ideas? If you're thinking in terms of physical things, like Socrates is, you can only answer one of two ways. Part or whole. Like a pie, a physical pie. How can you eat a pie? You either have a part of the pie, or you eat the whole pie. No other way of eating a pie. Talked about a sail. If the ideas are like a sail over all of us, beauty and goodness and likeness and one and many. You either have the whole idea, in which case it's divided, it can't be a whole. The idea can't be whole because we're taken apart. It's not a whole pie anymore. So you can't do that. You can't take, and you can't have, so you can't have a part of it, but you also can't be the whole of it, because then the whole would be in you. And I'd have it because I'm one, and you're a one, and that guy's a one. So we'd all have the whole, and it'd all be separated into many. It couldn't be one. So I can't be that. He wants to know what are the things and how do we participate in them? He talked about the infinite regress idea. Well, because he said, well, okay, maybe it's this. Maybe you participate in them. And so the things that we call like big here participate in the idea of bigness. Well, if that's the case, then you got bigness, which has to be big of its nature, right? Right. And you got big things, which participate, right? See, all the big things you could put in the category of bigness. Absolutely. Here we go. Bigness. So now you've got all these big things and the idea of bigness. But hang on a second. Don't they both have bigness? Well, yeah, the idea has bigness and all the things that's why they're in the category. Oh, so these two sets are now in a higher set. So something that we call bigness, the idea of bigness shares in, and the expressions. So now you've got three. The big things, the idea of bigness, and some super heading that incorporates all. Yeah. But that heading, that super heading that incorporates all, that we call bigness, wouldn't it be big of its nature too? So now we've got four things. We've got the big things, the idea of bigness, and the super heading, and now all of them can be put into a category, another box, called big stuff. But wouldn't big stuff be big too? Oh my god, another box. It's just boxes on boxes on boxes. There's a problem with that way of thinking. And then they move on. By the way, wouldn't the same thing happen with, there's another problem that happens. If you are taking a part of that idea, same, we talked about part and whole not working, but here's another way of seeing it. If you talk about small things, participating in the idea of smallness, then they'd have a part, right? Because there are many things having a part of that idea. That would make the small things smaller than the pure idea of smallness. So you're saying that smallness itself is bigger than small things? How can smallness be big? That's crazy. Doesn't make sense. So we're trying to figure out exactly how these beings relate to us in our everyday world that shares in big and small and beauty and justice, truth, the selfer ideas. The truth, one of the things we're after. The infinite plurality, that's the infinite manyness problem, infinite regression. So Parmenides says, oh, by the way, these intellects have to be of, even if they are conceptions, they have to be of something. Being or non-being? Being. Okay. By the way, these beings, are they all one? Of course. Of course, to have an existence, they have to be one. As Parmenides goes, then will this idea that is being intellected be one by always being the self in every case? That gave us a question we've taken with us as adventurers into our inventory, into our puzzle sack, carrying it over our shoulder. What does he mean? He's saying the beings that we can intellect are one because they're always the self? Shouldn't he have said because they're always a self? They're one because they're a self themselves? Isn't that the way we've been talking? What the heck does he mean? They're one because they're the self in every case. What? You're mad, man. You're mad. What the heck? That's good. We need to be puzzled. But take it in our sack and let's move on, adventurers, into the fray. By the way, these things that we do intellect, would they be able to think if they're composed of intellections? Or would you say that they're dumb? They're non-ta. Nous. Nous, the part of the mind that can intellect in the highest way and grasp these ideas. If they're graspable, wouldn't they themselves be nous? And intelligent themselves? Or would you say they'd be dumb things? Dumb, stupid heads. Non-ta. Without nous. That possesses no logos to say that these things that you can grasp with the intellect that must be themselves intelligent would be themselves dumb. No, of course. Which is interesting, because if there is a way that we participate in them, and they are of a higher kind of intelligence, we gotta wonder, how would they be using their intelligence? Do they care about us? Is it smart to let us just suffer pointlessly in ignorance, disconnected, blind? Is that intelligent? Wonder about that too. Add that to your puzzle sack. You just threw that in there. Socrates then said, by their nature they must be paradigms, and these other things are assimilated to these models or paradigms, and are their likenesses. By the self-participation of other things and the self-participation by these things is nothing other than being assimilated to the selves of those pure ideas. So Parmenides says, well, therefore, would that mean that the ideas are becoming like those things that are becoming assimilated to it as well? Is the like? Or are they not? Is there any reason why the like cannot be like the like? Of course it can be like. Accordingly then, says Parmenides, is there not a great necessity that the relationship of like to like should participate in one idea of the self? This is the infinite regression again. Socrates is like, well, okay, here's another way that we could participate. They're like a model and we're becoming like them. So if we're becoming like, then we're participating in likeness, right? And it's also participating in likeness because it's becoming more like us at the same time. So both of us are participating in an idea of likeness, which means we need another box. We need another box. Wow. No cheering. I need a booing. Because as we don't want another box. I'll add that next time. because that's the infinite regression problem. We're becoming like it. Likeness is becoming like us. So both likeness and us are in a box called likeness. But that has to be like as well. So another box, and so on and so on. Oh dear Lord. He says, so the things do not share of the idea through likeness. Then we have to seek after something else through which we have a share. We're still on the hunt. We're still questing and seeking for how the heck we become like things. Because we do. That's what it means to be developing, growing, becoming like something higher, right? Analogy is like something. Analogos, analogy. Anagogic is going to the higher kind of likeness. That's development. That's growth. That's what we need to do to solve our problems. 2,500 years ago and today in 2024, we need to solve our problems, becoming like that which is more, what? True and good and just and cohabitation. More like each other, sharing a likeness. We need it today. Within ourselves, that might suffer from sadness and division and fear and all these sorts of problems. And in the world, in our relationships, in ourselves, and in the world. We're still on the quest. What I'm doing is highlighting the stakes here. We talked about Socrates saying we need to put a strenuous effort. What did he say? We have to work diligently. We have to... I need to get this one down. Oh, back further. We have to diligently work in this quest, which means we need to have a reason for putting in the effort. That's the stakes. That's why I'm talking about the significance. In your soul, imagine being unified. Imagine being able to function better in the world. Imagine being more in harmony with the world, with your own self. Okay, I haven't quite found the exact quote. You read it earlier. But also imagine the world living that way. In harmony with truth and beauty and justice with ourselves, with each other, and with the environment. These are the stakes. Here we go. Top of page 9. We should strenuously labor in the investigation of these particulars. And now here we have Parmenides saying, this is the quest we're on. We need to find another way of saying how we participate in these particulars, in these ideas. So, why is it worth going on this quest? What should we think about philosophy? How should we then relate? Diligently work, strenuously labor, because we've seen the stakes. They're the best. I mean, they're the most important stakes and the most consequential for our lives and our planet and ourselves. So, we're seeking after something else through which they have a share. Parmenides, do you see the great puzzle? If you're trying to define the ideas being selves according to selves, we'll come back to this word, definition. Look how precise the Greek is. Definition, ideas as being selves according to selves. That's a key word. Definition is a keyword here. Idea is a keyword. Being is a keyword. Self is a keyword. Self is a keyword. There's only like 2 little filler words. That's how precise the Greek was. And that's how precise the thinking of Parmenides is. Imagine being able to think at this level. Imagine the mind of such a person. To be able to see these ideas so well and to be able to use them so precisely, so beautifully, and to benefit in such a way, in such a just way. So we could add to our question, not only are we trying to find this puzzle of how we participate in the higher ideas, but how the heck is Parmenides doing it? Because hey, wouldn't you say that's precise and beautiful and intelligent? We talked about how the ideas must be intelligent. Isn't this a high level of intelligence? A high level of mastership over his language? Is he using it in a just way to benefit our young Socrates and us right now through time? So how is Parmenides functioning with the ideas? Because he seems to be. We seem to be. Even if they're shadows, we still see beautiful things. There's still some kind of likeness between each other. Somehow we're participating and we want to participate better, like Parmenides is. Add that question to your question sack. And onward, adventurers. Do you see how great a puzzle if we're trying to define the ideas of being selves themselves? Oh yes, Parmenides, I'm wonderful Socrates, I see it, I think.
Wow.
I say wow.
Wow.
Now then, know well that you do not yet grasp how great the puzzle is of self. If you should place each one idea of the real beings as always being something separate apart. Always being. Look, you see a puzzle and trying to understand how we relate to these beings and how important it is, the stakes of going on this adventurous quest. Well, there's another puzzle, it's even greater. This is the great one. If you're admitting that there is such a thing as these beings, and we're trying to get to them, not in our sharing, by a beautiful thing, having a beautiful car, but beauty itself, here's the big puzzle. Right, this is Parmenides telling Socrates what's the greatest puzzle. What's he going to say? Is he going to say, capitalism, people is too greedy, and so that's going to be the greatest puzzle for humans? Is he going to say, mosquitoes? Is he going to say, our innate desire to dominate? Let's see what he says is the greatest puzzle for those who are trying to know the beings separate as themselves. What do you mean? So we're asking, Socrates, thank you. On the one hand, there are many other puzzles indeed, like I mentioned about mosquitoes and capitalism and fighting. On the other hand, here is the greatest one. Here we go. Strap in. If one should say that the ideal idea selves cannot be properly known by such as we have said they must have this intelligent, pure existence, it could not even be proven to anyone that he is mistaken. If it were not the case, on the one hand, that he who argues that it could be proven, if there's someone arguing that it can be proven, and they happen to be experienced, they're good at it, at the multitude of particulars, and who has natural talent, and on the other hand, the other guy is willing to follow these proofs through many long and elaborate details. But even then, after reading this text together with us in this channel, someone who's very convincing and can Parmenides and is able to show these proofs, Parmenides, and we are willing to follow, even then, he who contends that these ideal selves, these selves are unknowable, even then, may still remain unpersuaded. That's the big puzzle. Why do you think it's the biggest of all of the puzzles? Someone who is convinced that you can't know anything more than physical expressions. There's only the material world. And they're sure of it. But they're still open-minded enough to be willing to follow these arguments. Arguments with someone who's very experienced and very good and very talented at explaining that there must be another realm of ideas, the metaphysical. And it's important, and we have clear stakes why it's important and necessary for us to reach them and know them and understand them. Why would the greatest problem be that even under those conditions, they're open to it from someone good and talented, they're still going to be unconvinced? Why is that the greatest problem for humanity? What sort of things are we trying to do as humans? Are we trying to become better like each other, more assimilated to each other, more like each other, in a good way, in a beautiful way, in a harmonious way? To become more like one than many? With ourselves, within our own selves, with each other, and with the environment? Is that the real issue at the heart of everything? And we're kind of like each other, but we're kind of not, right? We're kind of still fighting. We still have wealth inequality. We still have national inequality. We still have divisions among any possible line. Race, culture, religion, politics. Pick a group and you've got people dividing up into those groups against each other. So we're kind of like each other, but we're not quite assimilated to the pure idea of likeness very well. Or we're not living beautifully or in a just way. So if there is, but we still think there is such a thing as being like each other. Only some people think the way of getting there is through killing everyone unlike. And that never ends well. Even if they could kill everyone unlike them, that there's still going to be more division and unlikeness and so on. It's still a principle. Unlikeness is still a principle of reality. We think of something like justice, even those acting most just in the world will scream at the top of their lungs, "We are the just ones! We are the just ones!" So we still think that there is such a thing of justice, and our soul moves towards it. We as a species are trying to move towards it, but we don't have it right, do we? So we need to find what the ideal of justice is, which means we need to somehow participate in the pure idea of justice itself, not as it's divided up into its many and its distortions and its devolutions into physical expression. We can't look to find justice by looking at physical examples. We can't do it through empiricism. We can't do it through materialism. We can't be stoic about it. And I'm very strong and I'm a big, strong, tough alpha male and whatever I learned about justice from my dad is the right one and I'm fucking tough. Or shouldn't. Just so you know, I'm living in Australia and Australians, especially blokey blokes or what Americans would call alpha males, I like to swear all the time. So as I was getting into that character, a swear word slipped out. So I apologize for that. But holy crap. That's kind of that's what it means to be tough and stoic and materialist and a good capitalist, earning the money and being alpha, and that's what it means to be just. Is that going to help us? No, of course not. We can't look at the manyness in the physical expressions as a way of finding out what the pure thing, the right thing is itself. You're not going to get to the pure idea that way. Clearly. So whatever our problem is, we have to somehow look to the truth. Again, what's the problem he said of Parmenides? You look to the opinions of humans. And you're persuaded by that. We don't want to do that. So pick a problem, any problem, and you'll find this at its core, right? Opinions of humans, the many opinions. The Latin tradition, where we separated. We're in the bad timeline, right? Think of like different games and movies and stuff. They have alternate timelines. You could say the timeline where the Greek split off into the Latin, into the manyness, into empiricism, following Aristotle and not Plato. We're in that timeline. We're in the bad of the two timelines. The lesser of the two. We need to anagogically jump to the higher timeline. So that's how we would address the problems. But so Parmenides is saying, well, here's the greatest problem of them all. Even if you're open to the idea that there is such a thing as justice itself, and you've talked to someone who's very talented and very talented and very... That yellow color isn't very bright, is it? The dirty yellow. I wonder if there's a way of changing that. They're not very... there's someone very experienced, very talented. And even if you're saying, well, I'm really open-minded, I'm a really good guy like that, and they're willing to follow, if they fundamentally believe the ideal selves are unknowable, they will still remain unpersuaded. That's the biggest puzzle, the human puzzle. You know who is very practiced? Parmenides. You know who is very talented? Parmenides. You know who's willing to follow? Well, maybe you and me and whoever else is interested in this. We have the book. We have the Balboa translation with the more accurate English and the Greek underneath. We can do it. We can solve human problems. But if you believe fundamentally that the idea selves can't be properly known, at your core, you're going to be stuck. Humanity is going to be stuck. This is the greatest of all of the puzzles. Can you see why that's the case? Which means it's the greatest puzzle for us as adventurers. Because we are on the Logos journey. We are on the adventurous quest. We are willing to follow. We are willing to go along. Do all the things we've been talking about, right? Look for keywords, develop questions, put them in our question stack, ask questions, share our understanding, be puzzled. Look for patterns. Understand the logos, apply the logos. We are doing it. We are the adventurers, but we have the greatest puzzle that if someone at some time has convinced us at our core that these things are unknowable, hey, if there was such a thing as the metaphysical realm, wouldn't everyone be talking about it? Or wouldn't my wise teacher who seems really smart, or my preacher or my priest or my parents who are very clever people, wouldn't they know about it? Therefore, it can't be true. Otherwise, why would my dad spend his life digging ditches, which is very physical, or building a great fortune? That seems irrelevant if there are pure ideas that can be known. Are you calling my dad a dummy? Well, I'm gonna punch you in the nose, you bastard. This is a reaction, right? This is what we need to overcome. This is our allegiance to our false beliefs, our pathologos. Like there's a logos to our destiny, you have to look for its reflection. So there's the Greek and Roman timeline. The Greek is the logos towards destiny. The Latin is the pathologos towards our fate. Hey, if we don't address injustice, if we don't address inequality and unlikeness, what's going to happen? More war, more inequality, more corporate and capitalist gouging of the people, more pillaging of the environment, more religiously based conflict, more ignorance and suffering, mindlessness. The more, if the pure ideas are intelligence themselves, then the more we are unlike them, the less intelligent we become. We're sinking into barbarianism. We need to become human in the truest sense, which is nothing other than overcoming this puzzle so that we can know that which is truth. One of those ideas that is knowable is destiny. We need to know that, along with truth and beauty and justice and likeness and motion and rest and one and many themselves, intelligence itself. That's the stakes. And this is the big puzzle. So, how do we overcome this puzzle? If we fundamentally think that they're unknowable, then we are going to be unpersuaded. That's the greatest puzzle, according to perhaps the greatest mind. Take it with you. Hey, if you have an inventory, make sure you've got another inventory next to you. Or you have a space in your inventory for this, the greatest puzzle. Take this one. Because it might be that at some level you don't think that these things are knowable. Or whether you like it or not, it's part of our culture, right? So we have to overcome this puzzle too. Take it with you. Let's go. Actually, that's a good note to take a pause while one of the other great puzzles is an empty coffee mug. Right? And the puzzles are not enough coffee in my coffee mug. Yeah, very good. So I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to be right back with some coffee, and we're going to power forward with this puzzle. Why is the greatest puzzle that we might be unpersuaded if we are stuck in a way of thinking that the ideas are unknowable? He didn't even say it's a way of thinking that the ideas don't exist. You might be someone who might, I think they do exist. In fact, I took acid at a dance party in the 90s, and I experienced this. You could meet someone like that. That's not me. I'm just giving an example. And I experienced the real beings for a moment, but that was just luck, or that was just the drugs, or that was just the dance music or something. And no one I've ever met has talked about that. It's not a part of our culture. It's not a part of our discourse. It's not how politicians are solving problems. It's not what bosses and capitalism are using to be good bosses. It's really unknowable. But I think it's there. Even that sort of person, someone who thinks that there is such a thing as the beings, if they think it's unknowable, then they're going to be stuck. So why is that? Why is that the biggest problem? Why should we keep an eye out? Because if we find ourselves in one of those positions of thinking, one of those systems, how do we get ourselves up? How do we pull ourselves out from that cave so we can level up and get unstuck? Take that with you. Put it in your question sack. I don't know if question sack is a good terminology, if I'm going to keep using that or not. Kind of sounds a bit weird. Question sack. Anyway, I'll be right back with a fresh cup of coffee. Because you know what's an even greater puzzle is if you're going to need more coffee. All right, I'll be back in a little bit.